take a moment. Let us know where you are watching from. We love you guys. We miss you. And we want to know who you're watching with, where are you watching from. Go ahead and put those comments down below. But thanks for jumping on. You guys know this is a part of a series that we're doing at our church called Questions, where we're answering or asking some of the big questions that we've really been thinking about for a long time, but we've been just too busy to ask, and probably buried beneath a lot of hurry and busyness and attempts to be productive in our life. And so we've buried those questions deep in our hearts and minds somewhere. And now all of a sudden we're in this crisis where our schedules have shifted. Some of us may be busier than ever, but still our schedules have shifted. And so we're starting to ask some of these difficult questions. And so we talked about last week, we talked about the resurrection of Jesus. We talked about proofs for that. And this week in our sermon on Sunday, we talked about this big issue of the problem of evil. And we're asking the question, if God is really good and he's really powerful, then why is there so much evil in the world? And so to help us navigate this, we're talking about it on Sunday, but then we're following up tonight, and we're going to dive deeper into this, okay? And so I'm excited about our guest here tonight, J. Warner Wallace. If you're a part of Grace City Church, you remember him coming last year speaking at our church. He is one of the leading apologists, and he's great when it comes to this question. So I'm going to bring him into the frame, and we're going to ask him some questions tonight about this, and we're going to talk about this huge problem of evil. So Jay, good to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, glad to be with you in these unusual times, right? But I think we've mastered now being able to live broadcast using these platforms, right? Because that's all we're doing anymore. We're live broadcasting from our homes. So yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, I've heard several people say, all of us pastors, we turn into televangelists overnight.
I know. Yeah. That's good. You and I were talking before we started too. This really is something that I think has opened up doors that maybe weren't there before. And that's one of the things we talk about, right? But it seems to be something that has such downside that like all we can see is the negative, the evil in it. It turns out there are ways that something beautiful emerges sometimes from these unexpected troubles, and that I think is part of the answer to the problem of evil times. So.
That's good. So as we get started, we're going to get started on a little bit of a lighter note. That's okay, because we're going to a really heavy subject. So we've got 3 quarantine questions for you. Okay.
All right.
So question number 1, I want to know what will be, and if you're tuning in, if you're following along with us, go ahead and type this in the comments and let us know your answers to this as well. We'd love to see those. What will be the first restaurant that you'll eat at after this is over?
It's called Dino Siam Thai food restaurant. There's 2 here in Orange County, and the one's right down at the corner by our house. And that is the one thing. We haven't even done takeout since this all started, just because it's just the 2 of us here. My kids are gone, and so it's just so easy to cook for yourselves, and we just haven't done any takeout at all. So that'll be the first restaurant for sure. Thai food.
Okay. So Thai food. I'm going to say for mine, I'm going to say Lucille's Barbecue.
I wondered if you felt that, like if you'd found anything here in Orange County that you thought was even close to what you thought was good barbecue. Is that the closest?
It's really close. My mom and dad are still in Alabama. They came to visit and they approved. So I think that's
good to know. That's good to know. Okay.
Yeah, Lucille's is good. Okay. Second question. What's the best thing you've watched on TV since this quarantine started?
Well, I've had people who wanted me to watch, because I work for production companies all the time on detective series, and there's this Tiger series on Netflix they've been wanting me to watch. I still haven't started it yet. So let me tell you how stupid we are. First, I don't know how this started, but we decided, I got interested for some reason in John Ford movies. Now, John Ford was a director in the Silent Age and then in talkies, and he did a bunch of westerns with John Wayne. All of John Wayne's like classic, the Stagecoach. These are all John Ford movies. So and a lot of them are black and white, okay? And so we started, I think we've probably burned ourselves out now on all the John Ford movies. A lot of them are with John Wayne. A lot of them are with Jimmy Stewart or Henry Ford. I'd be like thinking, But yeah, this is just Henry Ford. Henry, what's his name? Anyway, a bunch of old actors, and so that's what. But we did this. We did a break from that last week, and we watched. I'm trying to watch classics. So we watched a movie that is often in the top 10 movies of all time called Vertigo. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a Hitchcock movie. It's a Jimmy Stewart movie, but it's a classic suspense movie. And we watched it. And we're thinking, why is this one of the top 10? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing it, but we've been watching classics. So I would say Stagecoach.
Okay.
Might be the best movie, the funnest movie to watch. You know, old-fashioned values. It's John Wayne at his youngest. He's skinny, you know. I mean, he looks like a stud. And you're thinking, okay, this is pretty cool, right? So I remember John Wayne in True Grit when he was an old man, right? So it's pretty cool.
So you're doing like a lot of people are going back to the old days.
Yeah, we're going back because we've seen all the new stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So. Definitely, especially no sports. I mean, it's like
we watched all the Bond movies with Daniel Craig, thinking before the lockdown that we're going to go see the new Bond movie. So I wanted to catch up on the four that he was in before the latest. Well, now we're stuck. So.
Well, there you go.
John Ford.
Okay. 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 Last question. This is
by the way, Henry Fonda was the other actor. Henry Fonda, a bunch of John Fords. Go ahead.
Got it. So last question. This one may be the toughest. Okay. If you could be quarantined with anybody besides your family, you can't include your wife. Okay. Anybody besides your family, you can pick one person. And type this in the comments if you guys are following below. Let me see. Hang on. Let me read a few of these. We've got, as far as best restaurant, Joey's Barbecue in Chino is what Tara says. Jessica says Catella Grill. I've been there. Good place. Lisa says Annie Donut Shop. Okay. Okay. So sorry. Back to the question. So you can be quarantined with anybody. Who would it be?
Well, you said it can't be family, but I'll tell you, it'd be my dad. Okay. He's in Texas. Okay. So he's not close up to me, but he's the one guy. He's 80. And he's the guy that I think, okay, when am I going to be able to safely connect with him again? Right? Yeah. Because even to fly to him, do I know if I've contacted anybody? Am I ever going to feel comfortable, short of a vaccine, hanging out with him? You know, Susie is like, my wife is like the funnest person to live with. So it's like, she's my first choice for anything, of course. But if I had to move off of her, it would probably be my dad's, because I worry that I don't know, you know, how long is it going to take before I can see him and feel comfortable that I'm not exposing him to something?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you technically broke the rules, but you gave a good reason for breaking the
rules.
Well,
and I'm just trying to think, you know, I mean, who's yours? Who's yours?
Man, mine's going to sound really bad after you gave your story. I was going to say Jimmy.
What is yours?
I was going to say Jimmy Fallon. He seems like he'd be a lot of fun to hang out with.
Yeah. I mean, there are people that I think, like, sometimes I wouldn't mind spending an afternoon with, you know.
Yeah.
I think Clint Eastwood, he's getting older, and I think, you know, he'd probably be somebody who'd be fun to talk to for an afternoon.
Yeah.
Just because of all the stories he could tell you. But I mean, to be honest, though, I kind of feel like I mean, you have a sense of your own mortality. Talk about the problem of evil, right? I think we've had a heightened sense of our own mortality. Yeah. And that's why I think I think about my dad, because I'm like, okay, I'm losing time here. And I'm not going to be able to go see him safely for maybe another year. I can't wait a year with him. So that's
true. That's a good answer. Good answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, thank you for entertaining us with those questions. Before we jump into the problem, I think some people know your story. They've read your books. They know about you, but you haven't always been a Christian apologist, right?
No, I didn't think I would ever be a Christian apologist.
Yeah.
I was a non-Christian. I was a pretty committed atheist till I was 35. And so I became a Christian, and we were probably asked to serve before we should have been asked to serve, because we were in a huge church, and they just said, hey, if you're a warm body and we've got curriculum, you can teach this, you know? Like, we don't know a lot in Christianity, right? But we ended up teaching children's ministry, and then, you know, that developed, and I went to seminary through that church. And so, you know, many years later, I'm working as a youth pastor, and still working as a detective. I had probably most of my cold cases were during that season when I was either doing youth ministry, or we planted a house church we had for about 6 years, which was great. And so during that time was probably when my casework was at the heaviest. And then I wrote a book in 2012 that published in 2013. And then I've written now, I'm on book number 8. So things move really fast. And publishers, if you have a book that they think is successful, they'll kind of push you to do another one. And it's just like in music industry, that first album you've had your entire life to write and craft, and then they want your sophomore album in 12 months. And you got to write that album while you're on the road, playing all these gigs. And it's like, really? And so that's what it's kind of like. And so I kind of got launched into this position. But a lot of what I talk about is really, Stephen, just based on the kind of work that I did for years, working cold cases. And I find a way to connect that. Otherwise, I don't think I'm a trusted authority. I can be trusted in the sense that I can connect how to work cases about the past with how to work this case. And also the problem of evil is one of those things that we have to deal with a lot, because we have victims' families who always at some point will ask that question. Why did this happen to my kid? Why did this happen to my daughter? And not that we are obligated to answer that, but every cop is going to be asked that at some point if they hang around the family long enough. And so my answers are different now as a believer than they would have been before. I became a believer at the age of 35. So I had a lot of years as a cop before I was a believer. And my answer to those questions back then is different than it would be now.
Yeah, and that's good that you mentioned that, because we've got some questions that we had a few people that submitted beforehand, and we're gonna save those to the very end. But one of those questions actually comes from a person in law enforcement, and that's a big part of their question. Is they're so up close and personal with the evil that they see all the time.
Yeah.
How do they balance that with the view that there is a good God? And so we're going to get to that kind of at the end. But let's just go ahead and start that conversation of the problem of evil. How do we, where do we start out with asking the question, if God, if there is an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing God, then how does so much evil exist? Maybe you can even clarify that a little more for us, and then take us into where we need to go.
Yeah, I'm going to try. I've prepared something for you that I talk about publicly a lot, and I want to talk about it with you if I can. And so I'm going to share a screen to do it. So I'm just going to walk through a couple of, I'm not going to do a whole presentation here. I'm just going to walk through a couple of things that I think might be helpful. At least it'll help you to see where I'm coming from. So I want to posit it. I talked about my dad. I want to start with my dad. So let me share a screen here. So hang on a second here, and I'll be able to get over there. This is the place where you need to talk amongst yourselves awkwardly while I do this. So here we go. Okay, so here's a picture of my dad. I think you can see it there, right? Can you see it, Stephen?
Yeah, I see it.
Now you can't see. I can't move that screen over. He's just off screen a little bit. And I can see if I don't go full screen here, you're only going to get a part of my screen, Stephen. So I'm not sure I'll be able to do this. Tell me if you can go full screen on mine. But that means I'm going to lose you for a second too. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Let me see if I can hide myself.
If you can't, we'll work around it. Hey, you're the best. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to give you a quick presentation. I'll come back off the screen, Stephen, and you can join me again. So this is my dad here off to the right of this image. He's walking there with that goofy looking tie and that goofy looking jacket he has there. And he's walking a guy to jail who was accused of killing a 10-year-old in our city in 1972. And we didn't take him to jail until a number of years later. I'm going to show you what happened here. People ask me why this 10-year-old girl was killed. And her name was Jackie. I'm going to use her name Jackie for purposes of this case is now solved. So I could actually probably use her real name. Her real name was Terry Lynn Hollis. But I called her Jackie for a number of years because we hadn't solved the case yet. We just solved it last year. But she had a trusting personality. And if she didn't have a trusting personality, she would not have gotten in the car with this guy who was a complete stranger. So if you ask me, why did this happen to Jackie? I'd have to say it's a large number of issues combined together. Number one, she was trusting, so she got in the car. It also happened to be a holiday when her parents said, go outside and play. Don't come back inside until we're done making dinner. So they weren't paying attention. If she hadn't been a trusting person and it hadn't been a holiday, this would not have happened to her. Also, the person who did this to her, I'm sure, had a disturbing upbringing of his own. Most sexual predators are people who end up they've come from a predatory experience themselves as a child. If he didn't have that experience and it's not a busy holiday and she is not a trusting person, this doesn't happen. Also, he happened to know our city so well that he could find the niche little neighborhood that she lived in. That's a very interesting neighborhood that I don't think you would know. He must have known our city in some way. If he doesn't know that, doesn't have that background, it's not a holiday, and she is not trusting, this doesn't happen to her. He had the right vehicle as well, and he had the opportunity, a time to snatch her from the street when nobody would notice. My point here is to say that all of these things are related. When I'm first investigating the case, precisely how they're related, but they are. And in the end, together, they explain why this happened to her. Now, that's very important for us to keep in mind, is that when I explain any act of evil, and I'm going to go back to this in a second, but for a minute, I want to come off of it and just look at you again for a second. And so you can kind of share this screen if you can right now, Stephen. Okay, we're back together. Okay, so you see how it's cumulative?
Yeah.
This is the case for all kinds of explanations. You know, why did this, any event you can ask in history, why did that happen? If you're wondering why did this happen right now, where is God when this happened? Why would this happen? Well, it's going to be a case like that, where it's cumulative, where there's a number of factors. Yes. And I think that part of the problem is that when we talk about the problem of evil, is that we want a quick answer. And to be honest, if you're somebody who's been a victim of evil, I'm not sure that my explanation here, my rational explanation, which I'm about to give you in a more robust way, is going to matter, because you need to be helped and walked through this. And you may not need a rational explanation for why evil occurs. Now, but here's what I can tell you. If you have not yet experienced evil, well, then this kind of thinking in advance can help you, because it can inoculate you. It can help you to process it if I talk about it with you in advance of evil. What I think is harder is talking about evil after the fact with a family that has suffered evil. Because really, do you really want me to walk through the philosophical, theological arguments for the problem of evil? Is that really going to be helpful? Probably not. Probably it's going to feel like I don't care about you. Because what you really want is to be helped. And I think what we have to do is be careful when we're talking to people. Is this a young person who's wondering why COVID-19 is going right now? Where is God in COVID-19? That's one thing. Or is this somebody who just lost their daughter to COVID-19? That's an entirely different thing.
Okay, so
go ahead.
I'm just going to stop you right there, because I think you hit a really, really big point for all of us listening, that we have to really diagnose what's going on in the person we're talking to, and that they're not always looking for just a logical explanation. Give me this whole logical reason why. Sometimes they just need to be loved and cared for.
That's right.
We've got to be able to determine where they're at.
That's right. So I always ask, is this, if someone asks me about the problem, maybe I'll say, well, what happened to you? I want to know, did something happen that is really what you're struggling with? Because that's okay. And then we'll start there.
That's good.
And maybe some care is all that, to be praying for somebody.
Yeah.
I just have a very good friend whose son just passed away, who's probably the age of my son. And as I'm texting back and forth, I know he does not need me to make a case for the problem of evil.
Yeah.
He needs to know, how do I get through this? And he's going to get through it based on the kind of community of people who will just sit with him, listen to his stories, be transparent enough to let him cry in front of them. These are the kinds of things we have to do with people who have suffered evil. But I will give you something that I hope will be a little bit prophylactic, in the sense that I hope it will help you to prevent thinking wrongly about evil if we talk about it before it happens. So now I'm going to go back to that screen one more time, sorry, and then I'll just do this briefly, and then we'll hop back in. So you're going to have to let me go full screen. I'm so sorry, Stephen. Okay, here we go. So in the same way that the problem of evil is cumulative, when I'm talking to somebody about this in a crime scene, the problem of evil in general also has a cumulative answer that starts with these components. I'm not going to talk about all of these tonight, because I don't think it'd be possible to do that. But I know that all of these things are part of the reason why, for example, God is allowing COVID-19 to ravage your business right now, to mess up your home life, to mess up it's part of this 7-piece puzzle. Now, I'm only going to talk about a couple of these, because I think that the ones that are the most powerful. So let me just start. By the way, all of this together is what answers the problem of evil. So let's just talk with one of them. And this is the first one I think is the most powerful, and is an accurate view of eternity. Look, as an atheist, this is how I saw life. A line segment starts with birth, ends with death. There's 90 years in between. If I've got a long longevity in my family, I'm looking for 90 clear, cogent, peaceful, healthy years. That would be my sense of what a good life would be, right? So as a matter of fact, if I had died or suffered a heart attack, let's say at 40, or suffered cancer at 40 and suffered terribly with chemotherapy for 10 years, let's say, and died at the age of 50, I'd have been pretty upset. Because why? My expectation, I would have called that evil because my expectation has been cut off. I expected 90 pain-free. I only got 40. Then I was suffering for 10, and then I died at 50. That's the problem. If you see life as a line segment, I think you have a right to be angry. But what if your view of life is wrong to begin with? What if life is not a line segment, but is instead a ray? That starts, you remember your geometry, starts at one point, goes to the second point called death, and it goes off into eternity. Now, why this matters is because I know people who have had a surgery at a very young age. Maybe as a baby, they had to have a heart valve fixed. It was terrible. I'm sure they were in pain when they were going through that surgery as a baby. But by the time they were like 3 years old, they were over it. They don't even remember having gone through that as a baby, because evil is measured in the context of your life. And if you suffered only, a couple of weeks or a month when you were a baby, but now you're fine and you've been fine ever since, no big deal. You don't even see it as evil anymore. Well, listen, if this is correct, this view of life is correct, and life is a ray and not a segment, that means that every year you step across that thing called death into eternity with God, every year you live beyond this lifespan, your temporal life of 90 years seems like it's shorter and shorter and shorter until it's just a millisecond compared to eternity. The same way you can suffer evil in the first year of life, but be over it by the time you're 3. Trust me, I don't care what you went through. You could have 90 of the worst possible years on the history of humans. But 1,000 years into eternity, 90 years seems short. 1,000,000 years into eternity, 90 years seems even shorter. This view, our view as Christians, in which life is not a line segment, but is a ray, ought to change the way we think about evil. Eternity has the capacity to change everything. Let me just go one more or two more steps with you, then we'll stop this and we'll go to the next thing we want to talk about. The second thing I want to mention is this idea of free agency. I often say it this way. Look, God creates the world, and the question is which world is better? A world in which love is possible, or a world in which love is impossible? I think we would say a loving God would create a world in which love is possible. But that's a dangerous world. Imagine I was going to court my wife after I split up with her, let's say years from now, and I want her back, and I sent her this card. You will love me. Roses are red, bullets are lead. Take me back now or get shot in the head. Do you think this card is going to persuade my wife to love me again? I don't think so. And I think the reason why it won't work is because you know that love cannot be coerced. Love has to be freely offered. Love is an act that requires free agency. In other words, if God's going to create a world in which love is possible, he has to create a dangerous world that has a dangerous prerequisite called free agency. Because without free agency, there can be no true love. And that means you have to have the freedom to hate. That's the problem with free agency. It's dangerous. Are you sure you want this kind of world, a world in which love is possible? That is a dangerous world because it requires something dangerous called free agency. Now look, an evil God would create this dangerous thing, and like a knife, he would throw it at you and not tell you how to catch it by the handle or by the blade. That's not what God does. Instead, what God does is he gives us an instruction manual that teaches us how to use our free agency so we won't hurt each other, so we won't get hurt. Now, a lot of us will ignore the instruction manual and use the knife wrong, but that's not on God. That's on us because we have ignored his instructions. Instead, God gives us the dangerous thing that makes love possible, but he gives us strict guidelines so we will not abuse it. One last thing. And that's, I might cheat and go two. I'll go two more. I'm sorry, it'll be brief. The next thing is, what are we calling love to begin with? We talk about this word love, but usually what we mean is this kind of stuff we see in the movies, right? We talked about the movies we're watching. And if this is all love is, it's kind of a movie version of love. If you're a parent, there's another aspect to love that we call tough love that was not on the wall here. Tough love actually ends up being the kind of love that most of us as parents have to exercise, right? It's just the way it is. Now, C.S. Lewis puts it this way. We want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven, a senile benevolence who, as they like to say, like to see young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. Okay, that is not God. That's kind of like your grandfather. I can't wait to be a grandfather so I can do this, right, to my grandkids. But this is not what your heavenly Father does. Look, let's go back to our timeline, okay? You have birth, death, and you have eternity with God. Okay, in this temporal, we can call this your temporal life, and we can call this your eternal life, okay? Now, in your temporal life, or your earthly life, in your post-earthly life, you have earthly parents. And these earthly parents will let you suffer some evil. They'll let you do things on your own, make your own mistakes. They can step in and stop it, but they don't because they want to achieve some good over here. So they allow you to have that point of struggle so you can achieve some good. Well, but of course, you have a heavenly Father, also a post-earthly parent. Now, I've had friends who would say, well, Jim, I've seen people suffer and never anything ever good happens in their life. Like it was never used for good. Well, yeah, but you're limiting yourself to the earthly portion of your life. God is not limited to that. He might be trying to achieve something over here, way down there on the timeline. And so you may not see it. But God allows that to happen because love is more concerned with your character than your love aims at something lasting. God is more concerned with your eternal character than your temporal comfort. Let's go one last thing, which I think will help to kind of talk about the problem of evil. You can see I'm building a cumulative case. I think the role that it builds in, I used to hate this description, this excuse I used to say for evil in the world. Oh yeah, really? So God is concerned with my role in trying to develop my character through evil. Isn't there an easier way to develop my character? Well, I don't know. As an atheist, I would have told you that these things are valuable. As an atheist, these were high values to me. Courage, compassion, forgiveness, self-sacrifice, charity. Okay, you want those things in the world, right? I wanted those things in the world as an atheist. Well, how do you think you get those things? Do you think that God just flips a switch and you suddenly have courage and compassion and forgiveness and self-sacrifice and charity? No, these things are not a gift. These things are a response. And what are they a response to? Oh, well, courage is a response to things like danger. And compassion is a response to suffering, and forgiveness is a response to evil. Self-sacrifice is a response to hardship. Charity is a response to poverty. Do you see? You have to have these things in your world in order to get the other virtues you thought were so great. And it turns out this is exactly the way the world is. This world is designed to produce character because you have to have those things. That's why I never pray for patience. Who prays for patience? If you ever pray for patience, what are you going to get? A test of your patience. Something because patience isn't just a gift, it's a response to a trial. And that's why I don't pray for these kinds of things. That's just stupid, okay? So again, C.S. Lewis puts it this way. To ask that God's love should be content with us as we are is to ask that God should cease to be God. Because he is what he is, his love must, in the nature of things, be impeded and repelled by certain stains in our present character. And because he already loves us, he must labor to make us lovable. And that's what's happening often in trials. I'm going to come off that screen now, so I don't want to walk through all of these, but I just wanted to give you a sense of some of these. So I'm coming back to my camera, and you are too. So here we go. There we go. I'm back here. Okay, cool. So you got a chance to kind of see, I think, again, the hard part about this is that most of the time when someone's asking you, why did this happen to my daughter?
Yeah.
Do you think you're really going to be able to get a piece of paper out and chart that out, all 6 reasons? Probably not. But if we can think about this in advance, if in other words, we're not looking at evil in our rear view mirror, but we're looking at evil through the windshield, I think that having this in your pocket, understanding this philosophically, will help you. And it's helped me walk through. This is how I'm able to enter into crime scenes where a 6-year-old's been killed by his father. And I can walk through, the dangerous thing called free agency allows for crazy behavior and moral behavior at the same time.
Yeah.
Because these are choices we make. But
that's good.
But if the Christian view is correct, that 6-year-old is living eternally.
Right.
He's just had this little portion gone. And in a million years into eternity with God, he'll be okay. We'll be talking about it.
Yeah.
So I think in the end, it's part of, you have to have that stuff in your pocket before you begin.
Well, as I was listening to you talk, I just kept thinking, like, I think what you're saying is a lot of it is a perspective shift from, like you said, from temporary and what we're looking at. If this is all there is, then yeah, it's not a fair life, and there's a lot of evil in it.
Yeah.
But if there's a lot more to come after this, then that shifts our perspective. And the same thing as you mentioned with love, and really what is love? What would God allow if he is a loving God? All those things, I really feel like those are big perspective shifts. We talked about it with our church on Sunday, and the analogy that we gave was, if the world is a painting, or the universe is a painting, then, sometimes when we look at the problem of evil, we're really only looking at a small corner of the painting. And we're pointing to a flaw and saying, well, there's a flaw right here, but we don't recognize there's a lot more of the painting. Or like you said, there's the ray instead of the small short line. So that's good. That's good. So, okay, where do you want to go from here?
Well, it's okay. So tell me now, what you've got, some Q&A stuff you've got. But
Okay.
I also want to talk about some of the stuff that you talked about on Sunday. You sent me a couple of things you talked about. I thought you were spot on. And I know you mentioned this, is that it turns out that we talk about evil as though it's more than a matter of opinion, as though evil is an objective, transcendent thing. In other words, we say, when you say that it wasn't fair what happened to Jackie, or it was evil what happened to Jackie, do you mean you just don't like it? Or do you mean, no, I don't just think it was bad. I mean, it was objectively bad. I don't care who you are, what time in history you're in, what planet you're living on, that should not have happened to Jackie. That's interesting, because it seems to me that you're looking at a standard that's outside of yourself. You're saying there's something that is objectively evil, that violates righteousness in some way, what rightly should have happened to her. But that presumes there is an objective standard of rightliness, of righteousness. In other words, to say that there's something that's objectively, transcendently evil, that assumes the objective, transcendent standard of good that has been violated.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a matter of opinion. If there's not an objective standard of good beyond persons and beyond groups of persons, because the only way to get objective truths to get subjective truths is to have a subject say, I think it's evil. Well, if that's the case, you can get rid of all evil tomorrow by simply changing your opinion. Stop thinking of it that way. It's no longer evil. No, our group, our culture says that should not have happened to Jackie. Well, some cultures don't give a lick about what happens to a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
They're taking 10-year-olds for brides. They don't give a lick about them.
That's a good
You're thinking there's something that transcends even the groups. Well, what are you grounding that in? You have to admit the existence of the objective, righteous standard we call God in order to call something objectively, truly evil. Otherwise, it's just a matter of your opinion or the opinion of your culture. And I think we got to be careful with that. So I actually do think that evil is an evidence for the existence of God. And C.S. Lewis found it this way too. He said, I used to complain about this all the time. There was so much injustice and evil in the world. But to what was I comparing this? A person does not know what a crooked line is unless he has a straight line to compare it to.
Yeah.
So God is the straight line by which we compare the evil crooked line. And then we can tell that there's evil in the world. Now, the only question is, why would God allow it? Why would God allow it?
Yeah. That's what
we're talking about tonight. Are there reasons why he might allow it?
That's a good point. Well, let's get into some of those questions. We had a few people submit these. We selected, and so
sure.
Let's just jump into those. I've got, let's see, Drew. I think Drew's on here right now. So, Drew, I've got your question. Drew, one question Drew asked is, he wants to know the most important question: Coke or Pepsi?
Oh, sorry. So what is it for you in Alabama? What was that like? Is it different regionally? Like, what's the
Coke or Pepsi?
What would you say?
Well, I lived in New Bern, North Carolina for 8 years, and that's the home of Pepsi. So I got to go Pepsi. Yeah. Museum.
So is it? They package it there, or they bottle it there?
evidently that's where it was first invented and created.
Wow.
New Bern,
Wow.
North Carolina. So yeah, somebody just commented Pepsi from New Bern. There we go.
There you go. Okay, well, I can see why you'd be faithful to that. For me, it's just, I'm Coke. I don't know why. It's just this. I never drink Pepsi. But
okay, so he's got a real question here, and he says, "Let me get to it. How can we reconcile a loving God when He calls for genocide in the Old Testament?" That's a big one.
Right. Okay. Good. So, a couple of things about that. I get asked a question a lot in colleges, universities, because it seems troubling, right? You have the entire people groups, Canaanites, Amalekites, that are destroyed by God, where God commands the Jews to utterly destroy everyone, everything. I mean, he makes an extensive point to utterly destroy every category of living creature that's in that group. Interesting. I don't know if you notice this or not. But later on, when you read in the Old Testament, you'll find there's still people in the group that reappear in history that he supposedly told the Jews to destroy. There's an argument made by Paul Copan, who's a philosopher in Florida, and he's a real smart guy. He actually still is the president of the Evangelical Philosophical Society. And he wrote an argument. He wrote a book called Is God a Moral Monster? It's a great book. It deals with this issue. One of his premises is that the language used in the ancient Near East, A-N-E, to say to destroy, to kill, to obliterate, is kind of like language we might use today to say, hey, last week the Lakers killed the Clippers. Oh, no, they didn't. I saw the Clippers get on the plane after the flight. They didn't know one was dead. I mean, they completely destroyed him. Well, no, I saw them get on the plane. Well, what you mean is they beat them so badly in the game, they rendered them like inept.
Yeah.
Some of the language that God uses with these other people groups is kind of like that. The reason why we know that's true is because those people groups then still exist later on in history. Well, how could they if they were utterly destroyed? What he meant was to completely disable them from being a threat. That is part. Remember, I told you there's the cumulative case to any answer of the problem of evil. I think that's that's an interesting premise, and I think there's good reason to believe that biblically, based on the fact these people groups still exist later in history in the Bible. So fine. At the same time, I know that this is a group that was warned for 400 years that the killing of their own children being made as sacrifices to the gods like Moloch, where they put them on a hot burning altar and burn their own babies as sacrifices to these gods. They have been warned about this for 400 years.
Wow.
And at the end of that, they were finally judged. Now, look, we would say, why doesn't God stop evil? But then the one time that we know that God stopped evil, we're like, why did God stop that evil? We can't have it both ways. At some point, you warn, then you judge a nation.
Yeah.
And by the way, look at it this way. I'm an artist, right? I mean, I was in the arts before I was a cop. I was a designer, and my bachelor's degree is in design. My master's degree is in architecture. I got a lot of artwork that I created over the years, a lot of paintings. I've been in painting classes where we're painting something. Imagine if I'm in a painting class and I say, you know what? This is not coming out right. And in front of everybody else who's also painting, I take my canvas off and I just tear it to pieces. Everyone's like, whoa, this guy's kind of like freaked out. That's weird, right? But then I look at your painting and I go, yours stinks too. And I tear up yours too. Well, now I've crossed a boundary, right? You're like, hey, it's one thing for me to destroy my own painting, but don't be destroying mine. It turns out that the artist is really okay when he destroys his own art, but it's not okay when he doesn't. But if this is true, the biblical narrative is true, these are the creation, the artwork of God. God has the right as the grand artist to destroy his artwork. And he's the only one who would have that. It's not as though he doesn't have that authority. It's not as though he didn't warn him for 400 years. It's not as though he wasn't doing the thing we expect God to do, which is to stop evil. And it may not be that he actually utterly destroyed them anyway. This was language that they understood to mean render them harmless.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of all those four things that explains the Old Testament stuff we're seeing related to the Amalekites and the Canaanites and all that.
Honestly, I think that's the best explanation I've heard of it. And I'm not just saying that because you're on here.
Well, I appreciate it. But a lot of it's my thinking about it, right? Like I had to struggle with it too, because I didn't come to this as, okay, I love Jesus. No, actually, I thought Christians were all lame.
Yeah.
And then I became a Christian at 35, and I knew I was going to have to knock down all the stuff that I had been throwing against my Christian friends.
Yeah.
I had to kind of make sure, okay, now am I crazy?
Yeah.
Or is this reasonable? I had to go back and research this stuff. It's one thing when your skeptical friends just like to hammer you on what seems to be like an easy, you're the easy nail and they're the hammer.
Yeah.
The reality of it is we have to be able to respond to that stuff, even if for no other reason. If no one ever asks you, you will do better. You will be able to face evil. You will understand the nature of God better if you will research these things for yourself.
Yeah. No, I think I like what you said, that we can't have it both ways. We can't say, well, why doesn't God do something about evil? And then when we look at a portion in the scripture where it says that he did, then we say, well, why did God do that? Because we're conflicting ourselves. That's a good one.
And remember that even when children are caught up in the devastation, because we believe that God's plan for all of us is a ray and not a line segment, does it really bother you if he takes you out of this part of the segment here before the ray? Does it bother you if he takes you out early? What does it really matter? It's not going to matter to you a million years into eternity.
Yeah.
And children are in a different place. This idea of an age of accountability. I think God is fair, and there's good reason, good biblical support for this.
Right.
God would the children who are not yet able to understand well enough to make that decision for themselves are treated differently in the kingdom of God.
That's a good point. Let's see, one or two more questions. Joe Brodsky asked this. He says, "Without love, can there be such a thing as evil?" So I'm guessing is evil a parasite on love is kind of the question there.
Yeah, it is, in the sense that we know that the precursor to all of this, the foundation that makes evil possible, is also the foundational attribute that makes love possible, and that's the dangerous thing called free agency. It is logically impossible for God to create a world in which love exists, yet the free agency that allows evil to exist does not.
Yeah.
In other words, it's impossible to create a world in which both love and it can eliminate evil. Evil enters in the minute that so you're right. In that sense, you can have these two things are unfortunate two sides of the same coin. You don't get a one-sided coin here. You get a two-sided coin. And so if you want this thing that we call as a high value love, you must introduce the possibility of evil. But again, God is safeguarded against that, because what happens, I think, is as Christians, we often live as though we're atheists. Look, as an atheist, I understand if you're ticked off about evil. You only have 90 years to make it right, 90 years to pursue justice, 90 years to pursue happiness. But as a Christian, we know that's not true. Here's the problem. As Christians, we live as though we're atheists, because functionally we get upset as though all we have are these 90 years.
Yeah, man.
And by the way, in the first century, 2 centuries of the church, the Roman Empire saw that Christians were rising in the empire and demanded that all citizens of the empire bend their knee to the Roman gods. All had to. And that wasn't a problem for a lot of people, because the Roman Empire was so pantheistic. They didn't have a problem with Christians being in the empire. They just had a problem if Christians were in the empire and they would not also recognize the Roman gods. They had no problem. You can just add another god to the pantheon. Jesus, add him to the pantheon, no problem. But if you're not going to bend your knee to the Roman pantheon, you're going to say that that's the only true God, that ain't going to happen. And these men and women and I'm reading through the church fathers for another book. If you read the Ante-Nicene fathers, these are the church fathers who lived before the Council of Nicaea, before 325, 34, right, 310, whatever you want, that range, early 300s. Those people died because they had a very keen perception that life is not a line segment. No problem. They sang their way to their death.
Yeah.
They sang hymns to their execution, because they had a very Christian view of what life really is. I think sometimes we don't have that view.
Yeah, that's good. It goes back to that perspective thing that we keep bringing. Yeah. So that's a good answer. One more question, and then we'll wrap this up. I'm going to go back to Drew. He asked a question about free will, and he talked about Pharaoh, when the Bible talks about God hardening Pharaoh's heart, and he asked the question: Is that removing free will, and if so, how's that different?
Okay, so Wow, this is one of the hardest questions in the Old Testament, and it's a question that's been literally discussed from antiquity. There is a rich history in the Torah and in all kinds of Jewish literature trying to figure out like what is happening here.
Mm.
Because if it is God who is hardening Pharaoh's heart, how can he then judge him for actions that he didn't take? He was forced to take by God. Well, there's a lot of thinking on this, okay? I'll give you kind of a broad range here. The first thing I would say to this is that if you think I have an answer for every question, or that I even personally think I need an answer for every question, I don't. And I'll tell you why. It's not because it's like a cop-out as a Christian. No, what it is that I've worked criminal trials for so many years. And a lot of these awards back here are for successful criminal prosecutions. And I will tell you that in none of those cases have I ever been able to answer every question asked by the jury. Mm. And when we impanel jurists, we ask them all the time and say, hey, are you the kind of person that needs every question answered before you can render a verdict? Yeah, I think I'm the kind of person. I can't have open questions. You're excused. I can't put you on a jury because I've never been able to answer every question.
Yeah.
Now, I can make a stab at this one, though, because I think there are a couple of ways to read this. If you'll notice, there's how many plagues? The first 5 plagues that Pharaoh suffers at the hand of God, it doesn't say that God hardened his heart after those plagues. It says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart after those plagues. It's not until we get to plague 6 that God is said to have hardened Pharaoh's heart. And people have noticed this from antiquity. And I've tried to figure out, well, that's interesting, right? As a matter of fact, there's one view that says when it says that God hardened his heart, what it really means is more akin to that God gave him the strength to hold on to his prior convictions. In other words, that he, instead of allowing him just to bend to the pressure of 6 plagues now, now I'm just going to it. He's like, no, you chose for 5 times against me. I'm just going to give you the courage to keep on making the same choice you really want to make.
Yeah. You
wouldn't be making that choice if I hadn't broken you this way, but you really want that other thing. And so I'll give you an example of how this is. I bookmarked it. I've written a little bit about this on my website, but hang on a second. Okay, so I'm just going to read to you a very ancient view on this from somebody, I cannot pronounce his name. I'm not even going to try to. Sadia Gaon, I think is his name.
You tried.
I tried to. He interpreted the phrase harden Pharaoh's heart to mean to give courage, to buoy up the spirit so that Pharaoh would not weaken in his resolve to defy God. The thing he had already demonstrated 5 times in a row.
Yeah.
According to Moshe Greenberg, quote, a nuance of the same notion is expressed by Joseph Albo that the hardening of Pharaoh's heart was the removing from his heart the softening effect which comes from misfortune, so that he may return to his normal state and act freely without compulsion.
Wow.
That's interesting, right? So that view says that, hey, what God's really doing is just allowing him to do what he wants to do, but now he's just been beaten down to the point where he doesn't have the stamina to do it anymore, because he's already demonstrated 5 times what he wants to do. So that's interesting. That's one view.
Yeah.
I also think there's some merit to another view that basically says this. Look, how many times do you pray that God would soften someone's heart to the gospel? Okay, are we convinced that God has the ability to soften a heart?
Mm.
We are. So then would we be all that unreasonable to think that God might harden a heart? Why would he do that? You realize that if they just let the Jews leave, there's a very different story. But instead, they were chased to the Red Sea, and then God parts the Red Sea. Now go back through the Old Testament Pentateuch and look at every time after that event that God points the Jews back to that event to demonstrate his power, to motivate them to go forward. Remember what I did for you. Remember what I did for you when you ran from, I freed you from Pharaoh. Remember I did that for you. In other words, is there some benefit to hundreds of thousands that he might be able to accomplish by the hardening of that heart?
Yeah.
And that does not mean we know what the destiny of Pharaoh was. By the way, we don't know that if we're going to meet Pharaoh someday.
Right.
We don't know
the entire story.
Right. We just know that God has done something in the course of history that, number one, provides him with the impetus, because the whole party in the Red Sea does not happen unless Pharaoh says, I'm going to chase your guys down. I do not want this to happen. He could have softened that heart, I suppose, and made it so that no one was chasing the Jews, and they would have found another way around the Red Sea that involved no miracle.
Yeah.
Instead, he forced them to this point and then used that as the catalyst for 40 years of wandering, in which he says, guys, remember what I did for you. So I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. But what I think is interesting is this rather an older view from Judaism that says that hardening of the heart just allows him to do what he wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's a great point, that, God just kind of solidified a decision that he had already made. Got him to the point where he said, okay, this is your
He just gave him the courage to actually do the thing he freely chose to do 5 times.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what I'm understanding too as you talk is I think we believe a lot of contradictory things in our minds, where, like you said, we're praying for God to soften someone's heart, but then we're asking, well, why would God harden someone's heart? And so, so that's a great explanation, and that's always a tough question about when we're talking about free will and sovereignty of God and how all that meshes. So, well, as we wrap it up here tonight, I want to just ask you if you would speak to 2 different groups of people, because my gut says we've got 2 different groups of people watching. We have people who are followers of Jesus, and like all of us, we don't have every question answered. We still have questions. So we have that group of people. We have others who they wouldn't consider themselves a Christian yet. They're still trying to, ask themselves, if there is all this evil in the world, is there a God? And they're wrestling with that. So could you just kind of, in conclusion, what would you say as far as the existence of God and evil? What would you say in closing remarks to those 2 groups of people?
Well, I would say to those of us who actually consider ourselves to be Christ followers, so a lot of the reason why we're not comfortable with evil is because we really haven't done our homework from Scripture to see how to answer that problem. And it's not like these resources aren't there for it. They are out there. They're out there. I mean, I always say there's no reason to purchase anything, to invest anything, when all the resources are out there for free right now in an information age. So yes, we ought to be the people who can answer the problem of evil for others. And there are lots of ways to do this, but there are good reasons. Now look, you'll notice that as I answer the problem of evil, I'm not referring to Bible quotes. And I do that intentionally, because I know for me, and also for my victim families, I don't know where they stand spiritually. And so I need to be able to kind of talk about God in a larger way that is not so specific that they think they've got to trust a Bible they don't trust yet to get answers they don't believe in yet.
That's good.
But I want to make sure I can speak to these issues using my reasoning faculties. Jesus tells us that we are to love God with what? All our heart, our soul, our minds. We are to love God with our minds. We ought to be able to defend God with our minds. And by the way, we can. I don't know if you realize this or not. I'm doing some research for this next book. The connection between Jesus followers and education is crazy. All university systems that we have right now descended from Christian groups in both monasteries, in the cathedral schools, in the theological schools, and in the first 3 schools, first 3 universities. They're all Christian. Bologna, Paris, Oxford. These are all Christian universities that became the 3 prototypes for every other university on the history of the planet. These are all descendants of Christian thinking. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. We do not have to run from making a case, because it turns out we have a very rich history, even in the sciences. Go back and look at the scientific revolution. Identify every scientist in the scientific revolution. 95% of them are Christians. And if you think, well, yeah, but everyone was a Christian back then. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. As a matter of fact, Muslims owned the Dark Ages when it came to astronomy.
Wow.
So it's not, but they stopped because that system closed itself down. Once it conquered everything, it closed itself down. And you won't see the top 50 universities in America and in the world. I think 30 are Christian. The top 10, all 10 were founded by Christians.
Wow.
I'm telling you that sciences and education, we are not strangers to this. We have a footing in that world. Be encouraged to worship God with your mind and make this case to others. Now, if you're somebody who's not a Christian yet, I would just say, yeah, I get it. I actually spent enough time to know that it turns out that the Bible curiously describes the world the way it really is. Forget about what it says about the past. What it says about who we are today. What it says about the nature of humans. Our nature, our fallen nature to pursue sex, money, power. All the things that I know when I'm looking for a killer. I know what drives people. Well, it turns out I just didn't know that all of these are described perfectly in Scripture. there is some way. I mean, I would say that if you're interested in kind of making sense of the world in which you live, I would start with Christianity. I'll tell you why. Buddhism has a place for people like Jesus in it. It does. Muhammad spoke about Jesus, so Islam's got a place for Jesus. Mormonism has a place for Jesus. Baha'u'llah saw Jesus as a manifestation of God. It turns out that Jesus is primary in Christianity, but he's also in every other major world religion. That's not true for Buddha, by the way, or Krishna, or Baha'u'llah. They only appear in their worldviews. But it turns out Jesus appears in all of them.
Yeah.
If that's the case, wouldn't you want to know what is so different about Jesus that he actually dominates religious thinking? I think it's a good place to start. And I think if you did that, for me, the thing that prompted me was that a pastor said 23 years ago that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And I didn't think that was true. But I bought a Bible to see if it was true. And even if you don't like the Jesus miracle worker who's died for your sins, trust me, you will like the Jesus teacher who will teach you about living. If that's all you do is start there, just start there. But at some point, you realize that a good moral teacher will not teach you errantly about his own nature, because that wouldn't be moral.
Yeah.
So in the end, I had to take a look at Jesus and see not only what did he say about how should I live, how do people live, what is the nature of people. I had to look at what Jesus said about Jesus and take that seriously. But I would just start with the teaching of Jesus in the sermons.
Yeah.
You'll find something there you can steal. I was just looking for wisdom I could steal. That's all I was interested in at first. But it did start me on a journey. And I would encourage you to do take the same kind of journey.
That's good, Jim. Thank you for that. And so let me ask you this. For people who are interested in learning more specifically from you, what's your website they can go to?
Yeah, it's just coldcasechristianity.com, coldcasechristianity.com. We have a kids academy for 8 to 12-year-olds, and that is at casemakeacademy.com.
Yeah, and you've got tons of great resources on your website. All of your stuff is for sale. Your books are for sale on Amazon or anywhere they get books.
But I would say this to you, though, Stephen, don't buy anything. I was always suspicious of Christians who were trying to sell me something.
You're not. I am.
There are thousands of articles, 580 videos.
Yeah.
Right now, you are 580, and 12 years of podcasts. They're all free, downloadable, and savable as PDF files.
Okay.
I always tell people, until you've exhausted what you can get for free. Yeah, I get it. A book is nice because I can bookmark it and I can highlight it. I get all that. But what I would say is that's not why I wrote that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a retired detective with a pension. So I don't need to this is not why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
I do this now because I feel like God's called me to do it.
So you heard it. Don't buy J. Warner Wallace's books. Go to his website, read the free stuff first, right?
So the free stuff first. Yeah.
There you go. No, and I appreciate it about you. I know when you came to our church, I remember you saying, I do not want to sell books. I just want to get this truth.
I just don't. My least favorite thing in the world is selling books.
And I love that. I love that about you. Well, before we let you go, I want to just promote next week. So first of all, Sunday at our church, we're going to be talking about the question of are there many ways to God? Is there more than one way to get to God? Can you just go whatever route you want to go? And then next week, to follow that up, next Wednesday, we're going to be interviewing a friend of yours, Sean McDowell, from just down the road. And Sean's going to come on, and he's going to talk about that question, and he's also going to talk, tie that in with this idea of, can we really know truth, or is truth just something that's relevant in what you say and what I say is truth, and they can all be different forms of truth. So I want to encourage you to come back next week, 7:00, same time. We're going to be on here interviewing Sean McDowell, and it's going to be good too. But Jay, thank you so much for being with us. I love it because I'm sitting here, I'm just learning along with everybody else and soaking up what you're saying. So thank you for doing it. You did a great job explaining it.
Really glad to be with you guys. It's a great church. And what's great about this is you're kind of ahead of the curve with technology. You've been able to do this kind of thing. Congratulations. You're taking up for that. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate that. All right, guys, we're going to sign off. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll see you next time.